whenever I'm having a hard time, I'm like, well, I've explored all of my other options. So this
Yeah.
is where I'm supposed to be. And if this doesn't go well, then I'm just going to do it again because there is
Wow.
no
See,
other path.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Earrings Off. We want to invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. You can find us on Facebook at Earrings Off Podcast and on Instagram at The Earrings Off Podcast.
welcome to Earrings Off. I'm Lou.
And I'm Teresa. Let's get started.
Today we have with us Takia. I must say I'm a little biased with this interview today, Lou.
Of course. And so am I. Yeah.
Takia's going to share with us about her journey that she's currently on. I don't want to give much away because she'll talk about it in the introduction and you'll see. But hopefully, if you have any students, let's just say, or any aspiring medical students, please get them around the audio and have them listen in.
Absolutely get folks around to hear this audio, because when Teresa says she's biased, so am I. I am so freaking impressed with this young lady. I really am. And so I'm excited to have Takia here and for her to drop some of this knowledge that she just drops on me in casual conversation and impresses me. So here we go.
Good morning, Takia, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Would you introduce yourself to our audience and include everything? Okay, the path from high school to college to the decision to attending medical school. Don't leave anything out. We want to hear it all.
All righty.
I don't know if you want to hear everything. I think that would leave us here for a very long time.
Well, that's what I was thinking, Takia, but I'm just the co-host. And as I said, Teresa's a little excited today. Calm it down, co-host.
We'll give a abbreviated version,
version.
maybe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. So my name is Takia. I'm a first-year medical student at VCU. My first introduction or my first interest into medicine happened in high school. Now, I don't remember the very first time I wanted to get into medicine, but I do remember watching Ben Carson's Gifted Hands and really launched that interest. So that was my first kind of introduction. I ended up reading a lot of books about medicine. There is Mountains Beyond Mountains, which is about a doctor who did work kind of abroad and helping a lot of underdeveloped countries get medicine out. Read about some surgeons that were doing good work. And then I started doing some volunteer work as well. So that was kind of my first introduction into medicine. Going into college, I went in as an engineer and wanting to do medicine as well. But when I started doing volunteer work in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, and kind of saw the impact of social determinants of health, so that's food insecurity, housing insecurity, financial insecurity, seeing how that impacted patients, I got really more into kind of the public health side of things and how to help patients go through those things. So at that point, I was kind of into public health, still interested in healthcare, but not really thinking much about engineering anymore. I also will say, this is going to sound very silly, but I also did not like a lot of my engineering classmates. So I was like, I don't know if I want to go into a field with all of these people. Started thinking about other things at that point. Were you going to say something?
No. I'm just remembering all those countless hours, that you spent at the hospital during high school. I remember on Sundays, you'd be there all day, and Saturdays when you had time, and just when you had free time, I just remember there being a lot of volunteer time.
Yeah, so that was kind of my journey up into college. During college, I still kept volunteering at places. I did work with high school and middle school students and teaching kind of STEM subjects and getting them more interested in school and what the process was like. I worked at the health department for a short time and maternity care and kind of kept that interest going. But by the time I got to senior year, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I kind of broadened my interest a little bit. So had interest in public health arenas, had started getting some interest in the law arena of things, had applied to do teaching. So I was a little all over the place. Luckily, my parents allowed me to come back home for a little bit. And I then got the opportunity to work for Planned Parenthood, which was a great experience because I got to start working in the public health field to see if that's where I really wanted to be, and got that experience. And then also got time to talk to more physicians. I talked to some lawyers, started studying for the LSAT at one point for a little bit, stopped doing that. So I kind of went everywhere. But slowly realized that I really just wanted to be in the clinic. I wanted the one-on-one interaction with patients. I still think public health is really important, and it is part of a lot of the extracurricular activities that I do now. But really, I wanted that interaction with patients one-on-one and kind of trying to impact lives that way. I made the decision to go back to medical school, but I did have to do a post-bac program, which is a program to help kind of get your grades better and get your GPA up so you're a more competitive applicant. And that was hard. It was a hard program. I did it here at VCU for a year, but luckily was able to do well in that program and keep going. And then I went ahead and did a master's program here and got to kind of explore still a little bit public health things, got to do some data analysis with data sets and the effects of postpartum depression on children for a year. So that was really cool and interesting, but also kind of clarified for me that this is back the right direction for me. I want to be in medicine. I don't want to be doing research or data analysis every day. I want to be here. And that was kind of my journey into medicine. So explored a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then came back.
Yeah.
Takia, as you were talking about your journey, and I didn't want this point to get lost, because sometimes as parents, when we see our children trying to find their way, like you said, you explored different areas, you had the luxury of doing that, you were able to go back home. And so sometimes as parents, we're watching this and trying to figure out, okay, what are you doing? Because I've certainly gone through this with my son, but that's wonderful to be able to explore different areas to figure out, okay, this works for me, this isn't a good fit for me. And so to actually have that be part of your assessment process to help determine, okay, where am I going? Because that solidifies and makes you more confident that, okay, now I'm on firm ground. I know what I want to do. So I want to make sure that we as parents, and members of the audience, that we're not quick to judge when young folks are trying to plot their path, to just step back a little, as hard as it is, especially when they're doing like Takia. She was performing in all of those areas. And so to just be cognizant of that.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say being in medical school is hard.
Oh, yeah.
And, a lot of students, especially younger students or students who went straight through, it gets a lot easier to ask questions about whether or not you should be here, if this is the right field. And lucky enough for me, whenever I'm having a hard time, I'm like, well, I've explored all of my other options. Yeah. So this is where I'm supposed to be. And if this doesn't go well, then I'm just going to do it again, because there is no other path.
That commitment, Takia, I'm telling you, I think that's a large part of the battle. Once you firmly state, as you have, this is what I'm going to do. Now, all the other pieces that I need to make this work, I need to figure that out. And there may be difficult days, but at the end of the day, I'm going to do this. So I applaud you on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Takia, tell us about a day in the life of Takia as the medical student. So what does that look like so that, our audience can get an idea?
I'll be honest, some days it looks a little chaotic.
Yeah.
So for the way our schedule works is we have class from 8 to noon every day, Monday through Friday. And then occasionally we will have courses in the afternoon like PCM, which is our practice of clinical medicine. That's where we get to learn all the hands-on things that doctors do and learn those techniques in the afternoon. Sometimes we also will have some longitudinal courses. So we'll learn about health and society and what the impacts and intersections are there. We'll learn about public health a little bit. We'll learn about how to kind of do epidemiology and understand how to read papers. So those are the classes that I'm usually taking. In each class that we're learning, we usually only take one, that 8 to 12 section, we only take one class at a time. So for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we'll be doing biochemistry from 8 to noon. The next block, we might be doing physiology. Right now, our last block, we were doing GI. Right now, we're learning about the endocrine system. So each block is its own unique thing. So from each block, I will make changes to help make things better. So right now, unless we have a graded component or I know the class is going to be interactive, I usually don't go to class. I usually do the recording so I can listen to class on my own in the morning, and then do whatever I have to do in the afternoon. I'm also part of a lot of organizations. I'm a curriculum rep for my class, so I'm part of student government, which is a very new experience for me because I have never been part of student government before. So I get to work a lot with administration. And what we do is at the end of every block, students fill out evaluations for every teacher we have that block, which could be anywhere from like 7 to 14, sometimes 20 teachers, and then also an evaluation for the course. And then myself and 3 other students read through that entire document.
Wow.
So there's something, a lot of times there's over, 100, 200 pages to get through and summarize. And then we take that back to our the department head that led the course director, and go through that document with them and say, this is what you did well, this is what students didn't like about this course, and talk to them about it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And this year they also added a bias question. So if there's any bias in the course.
Okay.
And for the most part, I do that section as well. And kind of go through every single student comment and address each one. Whether it's bias, what changes can be made, which is a very hard conversation to have with someone who is older than you and probably knows a lot more than you do, but it's a learning process for everyone, and not every conversation goes well, but they are slowly getting better, and it's going to make our medical education better in the long run. So that's kind of some of the things that I dip my toes into. And then of course I do volunteer things as well. So sometimes I'll go to clinic in Petersburg. Sometimes I will be doing Zoom calls with high school students. So these are those things.
Yeah, and that's of course that's a lot, and it's important, particularly what you're doing in terms of helping to assess the curriculum. But Takia, what about just taking care of Takia during this very stressful process? Because I know you have been you're an advocate of making sure that you pay attention to the health and wellness for yourself as well. So what are you doing to make sure Takia is okay during this process in terms of stress management? Yeah.
Depends on how much I have going on. Sometimes I listen to audiobooks. That's probably my favorite thing to do if I have the time. Like I said, I have a bookshelf with over 50 books on it that I haven't read.
Yeah.
And I would like to get through that and get rid of some of those books. So I try to do that. I do some painting as well if I have time. I box, but sometimes you don't have time for all those things. So sometimes it's just going for a walk.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad to hear that you are doing some things to take care of yourself, though, when you have the time. So, Takia, going back to the whole admittance process for medical school, can you share the top 3 challenges or obstacles that you faced while trying to gain admittance into medical school?
Yes. One was taking the MCAT. It's an 8-hour exam, and I don't like to sit anywhere for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Let alone 1 hour. So
that's a lot.
So studying for that, I think was hard, and it was hard to motivate myself to kind of do that and do that for a very long time. And it takes a long time to study for it and get prepared for it. So I think that was probably one of the biggest hurdles. And this is a lesson for anyone who's trying to get into medical school out there. I was not a student in undergrad that was very close to my teachers. So a lot of my science teachers, I didn't spend a lot of time with. I spent a lot more time with some of my social science teachers, did a thesis. So I had some, relationships with professors, but I didn't have enough science relationships. So I didn't have enough science letters of recommendation going into the application process. So when I did my post-bac program, that's what I was hoping for, to get kind of some more science recommendations. But then the professor that I spent the most time with decided that year he's not writing any letters of recommendation for anyone. So that person was out. The person who I had the best grades in their class, I was a science class in, said he couldn't write a letter of recommendation for me because I hadn't spent enough time actually with him, which I hadn't spent a lot of time with him because I was doing fine in the class.
Yeah.
So eventually there was a professor in biochemistry that wrote a letter for me, but programs that required more than 2 letters of recommendation or had some issues with double counting. So my counseling letter was the same thing as my science letter because I took a class with that professor as well. I wasn't able to apply to those programs. So it limited the amount of schools that I could apply to. And then I think the last thing is the application process costs a lot of money. Now it's a little bit cheaper right now because of COVID. You don't have to travel for interviews or go anywhere now because most of it is all virtual, or should be virtual. But when I was applying, that wasn't the case. So, I had to decide if going to an interview was going to be worth it in the long run, because you have to pay for the plane ticket. You need to pay for food while you're there. You need to pay for a place to stay. So all of that, those costs add up. Now, some schools, which I didn't know this was happening until my very last interview, do provide kind of stipends or living.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about.
Expenses. So I think asking individually the schools if they have money set aside for students who wouldn't be able to come otherwise is a wise thing to do. And even if you can't play for secondary applications. So when you are applying, there's a primary application that goes to all the schools. The schools some of them will sift through the application and go ahead and do their first round of rejections. Some schools will send secondaries out to everyone. That doesn't matter if they don't look at that primary application. And then you write another set of essays, and each of those applications is another additional cost. And it might be anywhere from $50 to $150 per school for that secondary application. So I will say getting the primary application fee waived is really hard. But sometimes if you call the school directly, they will waive the secondary application fee. So, reach out to schools. They're there to help you, especially if you're struggling and you want to apply. there are resources out there that I didn't know about all of
Mhm.
them when I was applying. So
Mhm. That's great information, Takia, to say, just explore, and it doesn't hurt to ask. At worst, you may hear no, because that's certainly a barrier, particularly when you're talking about diversity and trying to get applicants in. And when people are barred from applying because they can't afford to go and do the interviews and can't afford to pay the application fee, that's something I'm pleased to hear that schools are looking at. But certainly we want to encourage people to just ask, try to talk to someone who's maybe at that school and been through the process to help you see about resources. So thanks for sharing that.
Do you remember when we interviewed Dr. Williams? And
Yeah.
one of the things she told us about minority students, one thing that they don't take advantage of is that relationship with their professors. And Takia just made a point about how important that is.
And that's true, Teresa. That's an excellent point. One that Takia fleshed out, and Dr. Williams as well. But on a personal note, I know that to be true because when I was in law school and we had to do internships, there was a plum internship which paid well, and they had a lot of students applying, students who were stronger academically than I was. That was, everybody knew that was the internship. And because I had a relationship with the professor who made the decision, I ended up with the internship. And that was purely because of the relationship I had with her. And she sold me to this firm. You're right. That's critical to establish those relationships. Takia, I was like you in undergrad. I didn't know the value of those relationships and the fact that you needed references, and that sometimes you have to have specific people speaking for you. So that's a great point to bring up. But Takia, on your journey, we know that you don't have to be shy. We know, and you don't have to share names. Have there been instances where you felt like maybe that people didn't support your desire or didn't think you had what it takes to go to medical school?
I think I am very lucky and privileged in this regard because I had a lot of support, growing up, going through the process.
That's good.
Support from family members, support from friends. But I realize that everyone doesn't really have that. That's not always the norm. Even my counselors in college were very supportive, and at a lot of schools, that's not actually the case.
Yeah.
A lot of counselors that are helping pre-medical students can be discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
So I am really lucky in that regard. I think the only kind of mistake that I've made in that regard is trying to get into some honor societies while I was in college. So I'm going to tell this story. In undergrad, there was a kind of a pre-med fraternity that everyone was like, this is the thing you need to be in if you want to get into medical school. That's kind of what was being sold to students on campus. If you joined this fraternity, you had, 90% of them got into medical school somewhere. So if you wanted to get somewhere, you needed to be in this fraternity. So I applied twice. I didn't get in the first time, didn't get in again the second time. And I was very upset about that because I was like, how are these students determining whether or not I'm a good fit for this fraternity or for medicine? But it still didn't really click for me that this is not the place I should be kind of seeking that validation from. So as part of another organization, I helped that fraternity run their fundraiser for the year. That was a 10K, and did a lot of, putting materials out there, gathering materials together, getting photos done for them, and just putting a lot of work into getting that event run, which is important because it's raising money for a good organization. So that is good work, and it's important to be done. And then applied again and was able to get in because I had all done all that upfront work that, quite frankly, a lot of other students haven't done for the organization. They're not going to do anything for them until they get in there, if anything. And then once I did get in the organization, I realized that a lot of people in the organization weren't actually doing anything in the organization. They were kind of just members, and that was it. Maybe they would volunteer something, but for a majority of them, they weren't really participating. Realizing that and going through that process, I realized that, if I want to do something, if I want to get certain volunteer experience or, start some kind of program, that I don't need to always go through an organization, that I can really find those resources on my own and get them together. And ultimately, I didn't ever talk about them during my medical school interview process. They were maybe 4 words on my application in total. So it was not worth it. The upset that I had not getting in those 2 times just wasn't worth it.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, that's I'm glad you shared that, because oftentimes, particularly when we're coming from backgrounds where we haven't had a doctor, in our immediate family, or a lawyer, or somebody who we can immediately go to, we have close proximity to ask these questions. You are trying to figure it out yourself. And then when people tell you this is the way, it's done, and you trust that, and then you find those doors are closed, it's it can be, it hurts. It sort of shakes you a bit. I'm glad that you figured out that you could do that independently, and that your desire to help stayed true, because that's going to carry, because your desire is to be part of the solution in terms of healthcare in this country. And so the fact that that wasn't shaken, that you keep that as your focus, that will always guide you. And I'm pleased to see that in the end, that was a positive for you. So good job. Yeah.
Yeah. Since I can remember, Takia's always had a book in her hand. She is I'm trying to find a word to describe it, but she's always learning. She's always she's always researching. She's always reading. She's, that's just a part of who she is. She's a volunteer. She loves to volunteer. She loves to help people. Now with medical, seeing an entirely other different side of her, the commitment and the focus and the drive to just get it done. I just need to know, how do you stay motivated? What keeps you going?
Motivation's a hard one, right? Because it comes and goes all the time.
Yeah.
You can be really motivated one day, all day long, and get a lot of stuff done. The next morning, wake up and just be very, very tired and exhausted from it all. I think a few things help me. Having the right kind of people around who are doing the same thing as you, all going through the same process, going through the same struggles, and being able to talk about and, quite honestly, complain about what you're going through, so you can get that all out and then keep going. So I think that is important. I also, I'll listen to some YouTube videos or go on Instagram, and I follow a lot of kind of mental health or, kind of uplifting Instagram pages with memes and stuff. And that also helps as well. And finally, I think whenever I get to volunteer or interact with patients in some way, I'm always learning and getting something out of it that kind of reignites my interest in medicine. And I think that's the biggest thing. It helps me remember why I'm there in the first place, because it's super easy to forget while you're going through medical school and trying to learn biochemical pathways or whatever they want you to know that you're not going to ever use as a doctor. So I think those are the things that help the most.
Okay.
Okay, nice.
Takia, what, if any, social justice issues are young medical students facing today? Can you talk a little bit about those issues?
Yes. So there's a lot going on, and especially this year, with everything that's happened this past year, a lot of people are a lot more motivated to work on social justice issues right now. So coming into school, we had a lot of students kind of working on different things. Some of them were working on kind of prisoner rights and making sure that they had masks and were getting vaccinated. Doing kind of policy and advocacy work on the Hill happened this past January, where we advocated for specific kind of public health laws. So all of that stuff is kind of happening. Everyone has kind of picked where their niche is going to be and has been working on that. A lot is happening kind of outwardly on the patient and community side of things and helping the community, which is really important. Internally, there's also a lot of things happening. So this year, VCU kind of got together and put together these work groups to work on different issues. So I was part of the diversity and the curriculum committee, since that was kind of some of the work I was already working on as a curriculum rep, and kind of going through the curriculum and seeing where, you know, things were not said properly or need to be addressed properly. So I'll say the majority of issues probably that get talked about includes like language and inclusive language in the classroom. So make sure we're, you know, inclusive of trans patients that we might be seeing, and making sure we have the proper language there. Sometimes it'll be about making sure if you're not stating race as a risk factor, but racism as a risk factor for a lot of health conditions, and kind of talking about that and how to approach that topic. So there's a lot of work being done in the curriculum side of things as well. I'm also part of a work group that is working on the medical schools on honor society, which is different, I will say, than the pre-medical honor society, because it does have a lot of weight in residency. So it's called AOA, and students are inducted into AOA based on grades, and then also based on kind of votes from members in AOA. And a lot of times those members can get more interviews during their residency application process.
Oh, really? Okay.
They get into competitive specialties usually. It's a factor for a lot of residency programs, especially I think orthopedics, you have to be an AOA for some residency programs. But the problem is that AOA doesn't induct enough minority students.
Okay.
I think even here, in the past 10 years, I think they had 2 African-American students inducted.
What?
So
Wow.
This past year though, AOA was like, kind of lifted that requirement and of the grade requirement, and just said, you know, schools can pick students that they think are going to be successful to induct in AOA, and they have to figure out what success means. And each school is kind of going through this process. They're either, you know, getting rid of AOA altogether, which is, you know, for some schools that's a real possibility and it's not going to impact their students. And then other schools are trying to just figure out, like, what are the new standards going to be? And that means you have to look at all your grades and shelf scores and exam scores and make sure there's no kind of racial bias in there that's going to impact students being able to get into AOA, and looking at what other factors, because you still have to keep it it is an academic honor society, so you have to keep it an academic distinction, but figuring out the best way to put students in that so that it'll help students going forward. So that's the second thing I'm kind of working on as kind of social justice facing medical students. But we're also just kind of working on the environment. I'm part of a research team that is going to be kind of interviewing students, residency people, doctors about kind of their experiences in medicine in going through medical education and how to make that better and how to set up a framework for medical schools to look at their own school and figure out how to do that work for their school as well. So there's a lot of things going on. Those are just some of them, but schools are moving and trying to make things better, I will say. A lot of people are on board and want to push things in the right direction, which is, nice.
Yeah.
Everyone's on the same page. So,
well, I'm encouraged. That's very good. Yeah, very. That's inspiring, and I'm hopeful listening to you share that. In addition to feeling hopeful when I talk to you, Takia, when I talk to you, I'm sorry, I have to go off script. You just make me feel like a little bit of a loser. I should have worked harder when I was younger. What in the world? I mean, you're just doing so much, and it really is. It's impressive. So I'm going to have a little moment with myself when this is over with and just think about some of the decisions and moves I made when I was younger. But kudos to you, and seriously, very impressive.
I have to say, just this is also off script for me, right? But I think it's so easy for us to compare ourselves to other people instead of looking at how far we've come on our own.
Thanks, Takia. Takia's right.
I was doing it this past week. I was looking at students that were under me coming in, and I found this student. He has like thousands of followers, and it's like creating raps about science for like high school students. I'm like, what am I doing? Have I done anything this season? It's got so much going on. Yeah. I need to get dressed. I need to get myself together.
I know, right?
It's so easy.
So funny.
Yeah.
But you gotta be on your. You gotta remember, like, this is where your lane is. This is what I'm doing, and I'm doing
Takia.
better than I did yesterday.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you, Takia. Yes.
Yeah. Takia, so we're coming to the end, and this has been such a great conversation this morning. Again, I thank you for taking the time. But I would like for you to, you've shared some advice, but I would like for you to leave us with some advice, particularly for kids who are entering into high school. And they already have some idea that they want to go to medical school. How should they be planning their high school and then their college experience that would then lead them to medical school?
Yes, I think that's a great question. Obviously, you want to do the best that you can in school, and that's whatever the best is for you. If you can take AP and honors classes and that's offered at your school, do that. If it's not, that is okay, but keep just doing the best you can in those classes and making sure you're doing well on standardized tests. And if you have time off during the summer, do summer programs if you can, volunteer, kind of just get involved so you have a good kind of application going into college. I will say that what I didn't know in high school was that there are programs out there that are undergrad and medical school in 7 years. So that application happens in your senior year of high school. So that means you have done a lot of volunteer experience, have had patient interactions, have talked to doctors already, and have kind of letters of recommendation, and you know for sure that that's a path, and you can go ahead and apply in those programs and be done in a shorter amount of time. But even if you don't get into those programs, it is okay. Everyone's path is different. So then when you're in college, again, talk to your science professors, do well in your science classes. Make sure you're looking at what classes are required for entry into medical school. Different schools have different requirements. So making sure you're getting all of those done, and then making sure you're volunteering. Volunteering is a huge part of the medical application for better or for worse, right? Some students have to work while they're in college. And so having to volunteer, work, and do classes can be a lot. And some schools will take that into consideration. And I would say, look out for those schools and apply there. But if you have the opportunity, make sure you're kind of doing that volunteer experience, and make sure you're finding mentors and talking to physicians who can kind of help guide you on the process and give you some insight. And take the time to explore different interests. I obviously took that time, and I'm glad I did it. I don't really have any regrets in that department. You do not get an award for going the fastest through it all. Do what's best for you. Make sure you're taking care of your health and your mental health, and taking the time that you need to get through that process. And when you do that, I think you will be a better physician in the long run. So that's kind of my advice, my 2 cents.
Awesome. Takia, that was great advice. Very good advice. And again, this was a really good conversation. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
I will be watching and looking forward to what's to come for you. I know it's going to be awesome.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me on.
Take care, Takia.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.